12 Rules for Life. An Antidote for Chaos by Jordan B Peterson.
Rule 5. Do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. Recently, I watched a 3-year-old boy trail his mother and father slowly through a crowded airport. He was screaming violently at 5-second intervals and, more important, he was doing it voluntarily. He wasn't at the end of this tether. As a parent, I could tell from the tone. He was irritating his parents and hundreds of other people to gain attention. Maybe he needed something. But that was no way to get it, and his parents should have let him know that. You might object that perhaps they were worn out, and jet-lagged, after a long trip. But 30 seconds of carefully directed problem-solving would have brought the shameful episode to a halt. More thoughtful parents would not have let someone they truly cared for become the object of a crowd's contempt. I have also watched a couple, unable or unwilling to say no to their 2-year-old, obliged to follow closely behind him everywhere he went, every moment of what was supposed to be an enjoyable social visit, because he misbehaved so badly when not micromanaged that he could not be given a second of genuine freedom without risk. The desire of his parents to let their child act without correction on every impulse perversely produced precisely the opposite effect. They deprived him instead of every opportunity to engage in independent action. Because they did not dare to teach him what no means, he had no conception of the reasonable limits enabling maximal toddler autonomy. It was a classic example of too much chaos breeding too much order, and the inevitable reversal. I see today's parents as terrified by their children, not least because they have been deemed the proximal agents of this hypothetical social tyranny, and simultaneously denied credit for their role as benevolent and necessary agents of discipline, order, and conventionality. They dwell uncomfortably and self-consciously in the shadow of the all-too-powerful shadow of the adolescent ethos of the 1960s, a decade whose excesses led to a general denigration of adulthood, an unthinking disbelief in the existence of competent power, and the inability to distinguish between the chaos of immaturity and responsible freedom. This has increased parental sensitivity to the short-term emotional suffering of their children, while heightening their fear of damaging their children to a painful and counterproductive degree. Better this than the reverse, you might argue, but there are catastrophes lurking at the extremes of every moral continuum. Because children, like other human beings, are not only good, they cannot simply be left to their own devices, untouched by society, and bloom into perfection. Even dogs must be socialized if they are to become acceptable members of the pack, and children are much more complex than dogs. This means that they are much more likely to go complexly astray if they are not trained, disciplined, and properly encouraged. This means that it is not just wrong to attribute all the violent tendencies of human beings to the pathologies of social structure. It's wrong enough to be virtually backward. The vital process of socialization prevents much harm and fosters much good. Children must be shaped and informed, or they cannot thrive. This fact is reflected starkly in their behavior. Kids are utterly desperate for attention from both peers and adults because such attention, which renders them effective and sophisticated communal players, is vitally necessary. Children can be damaged as much or more by a lack of incisive attention as they are by abuse, mental or physical. This is damage by omission, rather than commission, but it is no less severe and long-lasting. Children are damaged when their mercifully inattentive parents fail to make them sharp and observant and awake and leave them, instead, in an unconscious end. Undifferentiated state. Children are damaged when those charged with their care, afraid of any conflict or upset, no longer dare to correct them, and leave them without guidance. I can recognize such children on the street. They are doughy and unfocused and vague. They are leaden and dull instead of golden and bright. They are uncarved blocks, trapped in a perpetual state of waiting to be. Statistically speaking, are the most violent of people. They kick, hit, and bite, and they steal the property of others. They do so to explore, to express outrage and frustration, and to gratify their impulsive desires. More importantly, for our purposes, they do so to discover the true limits of permissible behavior. How else are they ever going to puzzle out what is acceptable? Infants are like blind people, searching for a wall. They have to push forward, and test, to see where the actual boundaries lie, and those are too seldom where they are said to be. Consistent correction of such action indicates the limits of acceptable aggression to the child. Its absence merely heightens curiosity, so the child will hit and bite and kick, if he is aggressive and dominant, until something indicates a limit. How hard can I hit mommy? Until she objects. Given that, correction is better sooner than later, if the desired end result of the parent is not to be hit. Correction also helps the child learn that hitting others is a suboptimal social strategy. Without that correction, no child is going to undergo the effortful process of organizing and regulating their impulses, so that those impulses can coexist, without conflict, within the psyche of the child, and in the broader social world. It is no simple matter to organize a mind. Modern parents are terrified of two frequently juxtaposed words, discipline and punish. They evoke images of prisons, soldiers, and jackboots. The distance between disciplinarian and tyrant, or punishment and torture, is, indeed, easily traversed. Discipline and punish must be handled with care. The fear is unsurprising. But both are necessary. They can be applied unconsciously or consciously, badly or well, but there is no escaping their use. It's not that it's impossible to discipline with reward. In fact, rewarding good behavior can be very effective. The most famous of all behavioral psychologists, B.F. Skinner, was a great advocate of this approach. He was expert at it. He taught pigeons to play ping pong, although they only rolled the ball back and forth by pecking it with their beaks. Such an approach can be used with children, and works very well. Imagine that you would like your toddler to help set the table. It's a useful skill. You'd like him better if he could do it. It would be good for his self-esteem. So, you break the target behavior down into its component parts. One element of setting the table is carrying a plate from the cupboard to the table. You can teach virtually anyone anything with such an approach. First, figure out what you want. Then, watch the people around you like a hawk. Finally, whenever you see anything a bit more like what you want, swoop in, hawk, remember, and deliver a reward. Your daughter has been very reserved since she became a teenager. You wish she would talk more. That's the target, more communicative daughter. One morning, over breakfast, she shares an anecdote about school. That's an excellent time to pay attention. That's the reward. Stop texting and listen. Unless you don't want her to tell you anything ever again. Every child should also be taught to comply gracefully with the expectations of civil society. This does not mean crushed into mindless ideological conformity. It means instead that parents must reward those attitudes and actions that will bring their child success in the world outside the family, and use threat and punishment when necessary to eliminate behaviors that will lead to misery and failure. There's a tight window of opportunity for this, as well, so getting it right quickly matters. If a child has not been taught to behave properly by the age of 4, it will forever be difficult for him or her to make friends. This matters, because peers are the primary source of socialization after the age of 4. Rejected children cease to develop, because they are alienated from their peers. They fall further and further behind, as the other children continue to progress. Thus, the friendless child too often becomes the lonely, antisocial, or depressed teenager and adult. This is not good. Much more of our sanity than we commonly realize is a consequence of our fortunate immersion in a social community. We must be continually reminded to think and act properly. When we drift, people that care for and love us nudge us in small ways and large back on track. So, we better have some of those people around. About the first principle, you might ask, limit the rules to what, exactly? Here are some suggestions. Do not bite, kick or hit, except in self-defense. Do not torture and bully other children, so you don't end up in jail. Eat in a civilized and thankful manner, so that people are happy to have you at their house, and pleased to feed you. Learn to share, so other kids will play with you. Pay attention when spoken to by adults, so they don't hate you and might therefore deign to teach you something. Go to sleep properly, and peaceably, so that your parents can have a private life and not resent your existence. Take care of your belongings, because you need to learn how and because you are lucky to have them. Be good company when something fun is happening, so that you're invited for the fun. Act so that other people are happy you're around, so that people will want you around. A child who knows these rules will be welcome everywhere. About the second, equally important principle, your question might be, what is minimum necessary force? This must be established experimentally, starting with the smallest possible intervention. Some children will be turned to stone by a glare. A verbal command will stop another. A thumb-cocked flick of the index finger on a small hand might be necessary for some. Such a strategy is particularly useful in public places such as restaurants. It can be administered suddenly, quietly, and effectively, without risking escalation. What's the alternative? A child who is crying angrily, demanding attention, is not making himself popular. A child who is running from table to table and disrupting everyone's peace is bringing disgrace, an old word, but a good one, on himself and his parents. When our children were little and we took them to restaurants, they attracted smiles. They sat nicely and ate politely. They couldn't keep it up for long, but we didn't keep them there too long. When they started to get antsy, after sitting for 45 minutes, we knew it was time to go. That was part of the deal. Nearby diners would tell us how nice it was to see a happy family. We weren't always happy, and our children weren't always properly behaved. But they were most of the time, and it was wonderful to see people responding so positively to their presence. It was truly good for the kids. They could see that people liked them. This also reinforced their good behavior. That was the reward.